What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? It's the Shield Brother here with the History Armada for Episode 8 of the History of the Germanic States. Today we're going to be talking about the failed Weimar Republic in the 1919 to 1936. We're covering that area today. So, just an overview of what the Weimar Republic was. After the humiliating defeat and peace terms of the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the First World War, it provoked a bitter indignation against the Allies throughout Germany, and it seriously weakened the new democratic regime that had been put in place. The greatest enemies of democracy had already been constituted. In December 1918, the Communist Party of Germany, the KPD, was founded, and in 1919 it tried and failed to overthrow the new republic. Adolf Hitler in 1919 took control of the new National Socialist German Workers' Party, which failed in a coup in Munich in 1923. Both parties, as well as parties supporting the Republic, built militant auxiliaries that engaged in increasingly violent street battles. It was very similar to the Roman Senate that had their own street gangs that would fight for them. And electoral support for both parties increased after 1929, as the Great Depression hit the economy very hard in Germany, and producing many unemployed men who became available for the paramilitary units. The Nazis, formerly known as the German Workers' Party, with a mostly rural and lower middle class base, overthrew the Weimar regime and ruled Germany in 1933 to 1945. The KPD, with a mostly urban and working class base, came to power in the East in 1945. But today we're talking about what led up to that in the Weimar Republic. So, the early years. On August 11th, 1919, the Weimar Constitution came into effect, and it had Friedrich Ebert as the first president. On December 30th, 1918, the Communist Party of Germany was founded by the Spartacus League, who had split from the Social Democratic Party during the war. It was headed by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, and rejected the parliamentary system that had been put in place. In 1920, 300,000 members from the Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany joined this party, transforming it into a mass organization. The Communist Party had a following of about 10% of the electorates. In the first few months of this state, it established diplomatic relations with this new Soviet Union that was in place. Under the Treaty of Rapallo, Germany accorded the Soviet Union de jure recognition, and the two signatories mutually cancelled all pre-war debts and renounced war claims, kind of coming to a very uneasy peace terms with each other. When Germany defaulted on its reparation payments, French and Belgian troops occupied the heavily industrialized Ruhr districts. The German government encouraged the population of the Ruhr district to have passive-aggressive resistance. Shops would not sell goods to the foreign soldiers, coal miners would not dig for foreign troops, trams in which members of the occupation army had to take seats would be left abandoned in the middle of the street. The passive-aggressive resistance proved very effective insofar as the occupation became a loss-making deal for the French government, but the Ruhr fighting also led to hyperinflation, and many who lost all their fortune would become bitter enemies of the Weimar Republic and voters of the anti-democratic right. So, in the 1920s, we just see this rapid inflation due to a lot of different conflicts going on. In September 1923, the deteriorating economic conditions led Chancellor Gustav Stresemann to call to an end to the passive resistance in the Ruhr. In November, his government introduced a new currency called the Rentenmark, and it would later be known as the Reichsmark. Together with other measures to stop the hyperinflation in the following 6 years, the economic situation would improve. In 1928, Germany's industrial production even became back to the pre-war levels of 1913. The national elections of 1924 led to a swing to the right. Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, which you can see bottom right, was elected president in 1925. In October of 1925, the Treaty of Locarno was signed by Germany, France, and Belgium, Britain, and Italy. It recognized Germany's borders with France and Belgium. Moreover, Britain, Italy, and Belgium undertook to assist France in the case that German troops would march into the demilitarized Rhineland. Locarno paved the way for Germany's admission to the League of Nations in 1926. So that brings us to reparations. The actual amount of reparations that Germany was obliged to pay was not the 132 billion marks originally decided, but rather they had to pay 50 billion marks in A and B bonds. Historian Sally Marks says that 112 billion marks in C bonds were entirely chimerical, a device to fool the public into thinking Germany would have to pay more than they actually did. Kind of a morale effect. And the actual total payout from 1920 to 1931, which suspended the payments in 1931, was roughly 20 billion German gold marks, worth about 5 billion US dollars and 1 billion British pounds. And 12.5 billion was cash that came mostly from loans from New York bankers helping the Germans pay back the loans. The rest was goods like coal and chemicals or from assets like railway equipment. The reparations bill was fixed in 1921 on the basis of a German capacity to pay, not on the basis of Allied claims, but rather what they could actually afford to pay and like what they were actually able to put out. The highly publicized rhetoric of 1919 about paying for all the damages and all the veterans' benefits was irrelevant for the total, and it became determined that how the recipients spent their share, it did not matter. Germany owed reparations chiefly to France, Britain, Italy, and Belgium. The US received 100 million marks for their efforts and reparations. This, along with the hyperinflation, eventually led to economic collapse and political problems from 1929 to 1933. The Wall Street crash of 1929 marked the beginning of the worldwide Great Depression, which hit Germany as hard as any other nation. In July 1931, the Drossmatter and the National Bank, one of the biggest German banks at the time, failed and they collapsed. In early 1932, the number of unemployed had soared to more than 6 million men. On top of the collapsing economy, it came a political crisis. The political parties represented in the Reichstag were unable to build a governing majority in the face of escalating extremism from the far right. Example, the Nazis, which were not quite known as the Nazis yet, but that's who they will be, and that's who you guys probably know them as. And also from the far left communist parties. In March 1930, President Hindenburg appointed Heinrich Brüning as Chancellor, invoking Article 848 of Weimar's Constitution, which allowed him to override Parliament and seize emergency powers to push through his package of austerity measures against a majority of the Social Democrats, Communists, and Nazis. Brüning made very good use of emergency decrees and dissolved Parliament entirely. In March and April of 1932, Hindenburg was re-elected in the German presidential election of 1932. So the Social Workers' Party, the Nazi Party, was the largest party of the national elections of 1932. On July 31st, 1932, it received 37.3% of the votes. And in the election of November 6, 1932, it received slightly less, but still the largest share of the votes at 33.2%. Making it the biggest party in the Reichstag. The Communist Party came in third with 15%. Together, the anti-democratic parties of the far right and the far left were now able to hold the majority of seats in Parliament, but they were at a sword's point with each other. So although they had majority vote within the Reichstag, they were still at odds with each other. And it led ultimately to a lot of fighting out in the streets. The Nazis were particularly successful among Protestants, among unemployed young voters, among the lower middle class in the cities, and among the rural population. It was weakest in Catholic areas and in largest cities. On January 30th, 1933, pressured by former Chancellor Franz von Papen and other conservatives, President Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. So here's when we start to see the rise of this Nazi party, and as they start to gain more votes and they start to get there legally and elected there, and then from a lot of conservatives seeing Adolf Hitler as kind of the man they needed to be Chancellor for this hard time and this economic crisis, President Hindenburg appoints him Chancellor of all Germany. So what was the science and culture like during this time for the Weimar Republic? Well, the Weimar years saw a flowering of German science and high culture. Before the Nazi regime resulted in a decline in the scientific and cultural life, Germany was then forced many renowned scientists and writers to flee, At this time, German recipients dominated the Nobel Prizes in sciences. Germany dominated the world in physics before 1933 and was led by people such as Hermann von Helmholtz, Joseph von Fraunhofer, Daniel Gabriel von Hayf, and Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, Albert Einstein, and many others. There were theoretical mathematicians, just all kinds of excellent physicists, mathematicians, writers, all kinds of people up to 1933, and it's really sad to see how that would decline after the Weimar Republic. Among the most important German writers, there was Thomas Mann, Hermann Hesse, and Bertolt Brecht, and just a lot of different, pessimistic historians and others who wrote on the decline of the West and on the inevitable decay of Western civilization influenced at this time. And after 1933, Nazi proponents of Aryan physics, quote-unquote, led by the Nobel Prize winner Johann Stark and Philipp Leonard, attacked Einstein's theory of relativity as a degenerate example of Jewish materialism in the realm of science. Many scientists and humanists immigrated from Germany. Example, Einstein and his family moved permanently to the US from Germany, but some of the other scientists and peoples returned after 1945. But in 1933, we see a huge emigration of just all of the cultural and scientific peoples at this time in Germany to flee the rapid decay and oppression by the decline of the Weimar Republic into the Third Reich. So, if you turn in next week, we're going to talk about Nazi Germany and about World War II. We'll talk about all of their effects, all of their efforts in the war, how they really changed the war, and that will be our next episode. After that, we will probably only have one more episode. So there's 2 episodes left in this history of the Germanic States. Thank you so much for watching. As always, this has been the Shield Brother with the History Armada. If you think I can improve, leave me a comment. If you like this, leave me a like. If you didn't, leave me a dislike. If I'm a little stuffy, I'm sorry about this. I have a cold. And as always, I'll catch y'all next time.